Once she was destined for greatness. The alien princess, with her smooth, shining skin and regal presence, was to be the future ruler of her people. Her name echoed through the grand halls of the palace, a symbol of hope for the entire empire. But now she sat alone in the quiet, forgotten corner of a distant planet, the weight of her new life pressing down on her shoulders. The princess, once admired by all, had been cast aside like a broken toy. She had been declared infertile by the empire's top scientists, a label that sealed her fate. In their world, fertility wasn't just about having children, it was the key to the future of their species. The ability to bear heirs was seen as the ultimate proof of strength and power. Without it, she was no longer seen as valuable, no longer fit to be queen. Her family, once so proud, had rejected her. Her father, the emperor, had been the first to distance himself, his cold words cutting deeper than any sword. "You are no longer fit to rule," he had said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You are a disgrace to the throne." Her mother, once a loving figure, had silently agreed with her husband. The princess felt the sting of her mother's rejection every time she walked past the cold, empty throne room. The walls that had once echoed with promises of greatness now mocked her with their silence. Her people, too, had turned their backs on her. The citizens of the empire no longer viewed her as a symbol of hope. She was a failure. Her existence, once a beacon of promise, now carried the weight of shame. She could hear the whispers of the palace servants as she walked by. Whispers about her infertility, about how she had been given away as though she were nothing more than a forgotten treasure. The princess tried to ignore them, but it was impossible. The gossip seemed to follow her wherever she went. In the end, the princess was exiled to a far-off planet, where the empire hoped she would live out her days in quiet isolation. They thought that banishing her to a barren, distant world would erase the stain she had placed on their reputation. A world far from the palace, far from anyone who might remember her former glory. She spent her days in a small, run-down cabin, surrounded by the silence of the alien landscape. The sky above her was an endless stretch of dark, swirling clouds, and the land below was rough and unforgiving. There were no other creatures for miles, and the only sound she ever heard was the wind howling through the desolate rocks. It was a stark contrast to the lively halls of the palace where she had once danced at lavish balls and attended grand ceremonies. Now she did nothing but stare out at the barren world before her, her thoughts as empty as the landscape. She had no purpose, no future. The once proud princess had been reduced to nothing. She had no family, no kingdom, no friends. She was alone. But deep inside, a part of her still held on to the faintest hope. She couldn't believe that this was her fate. There had to be more for her than this cold exile. There had to be a way to prove her worth, to show her people that they had made a mistake. Even if they would never accept her again, she had to find something, some reason, to keep going. It was during these long days of solitude that the princess began to think of the past, of the days when she had been full of dreams and ambitions. She remembered the stories of her ancestors, great rulers who had built vast empires, who had led their people to prosperity. They had been loved by their people, respected by their enemies. The princess had once believed that she would be the next in line, that she too would lead with strength and wisdom. But now that future seemed like a distant dream, lost in the shadows of her current reality. As she sat by the window, staring at the desolate landscape, the princess began to question everything. How had she become so powerless? How had she gone from being the future of her people to being a forgotten, discarded princess on the edge of the galaxy? Her thoughts were interrupted by a faint sound in the distance. It was a noise she hadn't heard in what felt like forever. A sound of something moving, something alive. She stood up, her heart pounding in her chest. Could it be another traveler? Another lost soul, like her? Or was it something else? Her curiosity stirred, but she knew better than to hope for anything. She had learned long ago that hope only led to disappointment. And yet, despite herself, she found her steps drawing her toward the door. She had nothing else to do, no one else to turn to, and for the first time in a long while, She felt a spark of something inside her. With a deep breath, she opened the door and stepped out into the harsh world outside, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. She had no idea that this small, uncertain step would lead her into a journey that would change everything. The princess walked out into the open, the harsh wind brushing against her face. Her mind was filled with questions, and her heart beat faster with anticipation. It had been so long since she'd seen anything or anyone. The sound she had heard was faint, but it had stirred something deep inside her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in what seemed like forever. Hope. She didn't know what she was hoping for. It wasn't like she expected someone to come to her rescue. No one cared about her anymore. Still, her feet moved toward the sound, step by step, her thoughts racing. The sound came closer, and as she turned the corner of a rocky outcrop, she saw it, a ship, a human ship. It was small, but it was a ship nonetheless. The sight of it took her breath away. She had seen human ships in her past life, when she had attended high-profile meetings with other species. But this was different. This ship seemed lost. Unlike the sleek, powerful vessels of her empire, this one was old and looked as if it had seen better days. A small figure emerged from the ship. The princess could hardly believe her eyes. A human. A real, living human. She had not seen one for so long. The last time she encountered humans, it had been at an intergalactic meeting, and they had treated her like royalty. But that was before she had been declared infertile, before she had been cast away. The man who stepped out of the ship looked nothing like the people she remembered. He was dressed in simple clothes, nothing grand or extravagant. His face was weathered, as if he had traveled long distances far from any civilization. His eyes, though, were kind, and as soon as he saw her, they filled with curiosity rather than fear or disgust. He didn't seem surprised to find an alien princess in the middle of nowhere. He didn't seem worried either. He simply looked at her with a kind smile, as if they were old friends reunited after years apart. "Are you lost?" the human asked, his voice warm and friendly. The princess hesitated. She had never been spoken to like this before. She was used to being treated with reverence as if she were above everyone. But this human didn't know who she was. He didn't know the princess who had once been the heir to a grand empire. He just saw her as another person, and somehow that felt different and strange. "No," she finally answered, her voice quieter than she expected. "I'm not lost." She stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say next. She had never been so unsure of herself. She had been raised to be strong, to always know what to say, what to do. But now, all she could think about was how isolated she felt. She couldn't even recognize the person she had become. The man raised an eyebrow but didn't press her further. Instead, he gestured to the ship behind him. "I'm Marcus," he said. "I'm exploring this planet. It's part of my research mission." He paused, then added, "I didn't expect to find anyone here." The princess stared at the ship for a moment. It looked so ordinary, so different from the grand vessels she was used to. The idea of someone traveling in such a small, humble ship seemed strange to her. But there was something about Marcus that made her feel like she could trust him, even though he was human and she had never trusted anyone like this before. "I don't suppose you're looking for anyone," the princess said softly, not sure why she was speaking at all. Marcus smiled again, his eyes twinkling. "Not specifically. But now that I've found you, I'd say it was meant to be." The princess blinked, confused. "What do you mean by that?" Marcus shrugged as if it were no big deal. "I don't know. Maybe it's just the feeling I get. I travel alone a lot. It gets lonely, you know? Meeting new people, learning new things, it's what keeps me going. I never thought I'd find someone like you, though." The princess felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. No one had spoken to her like that in so long. No one had treated her like a person with value. To everyone else, she was a mistake that had been abandoned and forgotten. But here was this human, this stranger, who didn't seem to care about any of that. He didn't care that she was a princess. He didn't care that she had been cast aside by her own people. I'm not who you think I am, the princess said, her voice trembling slightly. I'm not important anymore. Marcus frowned and stepped closer. I don't know about that. Everyone has value. And you seem important to me. Not because you're a princess, but because you're here and I found you. The princess swallowed hard. His words had struck a chord deep within her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt like someone saw her, not as a symbol or a figure of royalty, but as herself, a person. I've been living here alone, she said after a moment, her voice quieter now. I've been forgotten. No one remembers me. You're not forgotten, Marcus said gently. Not by me. She looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. He wasn't lying. There was no reason for him to lie to her. For the first time in a long time, she felt something stir inside her. Something she had thought she had lost forever. She felt hope. I could use some company, she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Marcus smiled, his eyes filled with understanding. Well then, I'll stick around for a while. Maybe we can figure things out together. The princess wasn't sure what to think. She had never let herself be vulnerable before. She had always been strong, always had to be. But this human Marcus, he made her feel like it was okay to be uncertain. It was okay to not have all the answers. Maybe you're right, she said softly. Maybe. I am important. In some way. Marcus didn't respond with words. Instead, he just smiled and nodded. And for the first time in a long time, the princess felt like she wasn't alone anymore. As the days passed, the princess found herself growing more accustomed to the presence of Marcus. It was strange, really. She had spent so much time alone, isolated from others, and now here was a human, an unexpected visitor, who had become a comforting presence in her life. For the first time since her exile, she didn't feel completely alone. Marcus had set up a small camp near her cabin, his ship parked nearby. He spent his days working on his research, though he always made time to sit with her. At first, their conversations were awkward, full of uncertainty. The princess had never been good at talking to people without the weight of royal expectations hanging over her, but slowly, the two of them found a rhythm in their daily routines. They talked about everything and nothing, his travels, her memories of the palace, the stars above them, the simple things that made life worth living. One evening, as they sat, under the stars, the princess shared something she had never told anyone. I once dreamed of being more than just a princess, she said quietly, staring at the night sky. I thought I would be a great ruler, someone who could change things for my people, who could lead them to a better future. But now I wonder if I was ever meant for that at all. Marcus didn't say anything right away. He just listened, his eyes focused on her. There was no pity in his gaze, only understanding. He knew how it felt to lose a dream, to feel as if everything that once mattered had slipped through your fingers. You're not the first person to feel that way, Marcus said after a long silence. I've been traveling across the galaxy for years. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just chasing something I can never catch. But every journey teaches me something new. Every person I meet, every world I explore, it all changes me in ways I can't predict. The princess turned her gaze toward him, her heart racing. There was something in his words that resonated deeply with her. He didn't see her as a failure, as someone who had been cast aside. He saw her as a person, someone with a future, someone who could still make a difference. I never thought I'd find anyone like you, she admitted. I've been lost, not just physically but inside. I thought that if I wasn't who my people wanted me to be, then I was nothing. Marcus smiled softly. I don't think you're nothing. You're more than what they told you. And you're not alone anymore. Her eyes widened slightly at his words. It wasn't that she hadn't heard kind words before, but from him, they felt real. For the first time in ages, she felt like someone actually understood her. One day, as they explored the rocky terrain near her cabin, Marcus began explaining a device he had found aboard his ship. It was a simple tool, designed to gather data from planets, but it had a feature that caught the princess's attention. "I think this could help you," Marcus said, handing it to her. "It's a sensor, but I believe it could also reveal things about your species that your scientists didn't understand." The princess looked at the device, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "Well," Marcus explained, "you've been told you're infertile, right? What if that's not the whole truth? This tool might help us understand what's really going on. It might reveal something hidden, something no one knew before." The princess hesitated. The idea of proving the Empire wrong, of showing them that they had made a mistake about her, was both exciting and terrifying. What if Marcus was wrong? What if she really was infertile, as they had claimed? Could she handle the disappointment again? But then, a thought struck her. What if Marcus was right? What if there was something more to her than they had all realized? "I'm willing to try," she said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling inside her. "If there's a chance that they were wrong, then I need to know. I need to find out for myself." Marcus grinned, clearly pleased. "I'll help you. We'll figure it out together." From that moment on, their work together took on new meaning. The princess began using the sensor, carefully studying the data it collected. At first, it seemed like the device was just another tool, nothing special. But as the days passed, strange patterns began to emerge. There were signals in her biology that didn't match the Empire's findings. It was as if the device was revealing hidden secrets, things that no one had ever considered. The princess felt a spark of excitement she hadn't felt in years. What if Marcus was right? What if the answers she had been searching for were buried inside her all along, waiting to be discovered? As the weeks passed, the princess grew stronger, not just physically, but emotionally. She had started this journey feeling lost and hopeless, but now she felt like there was something to fight for. She wasn't just going to sit by and let her fate be decided by others. She would take control of her own future. It wasn't just the sensor that was changing her, though. It was the bond she had formed with Marcus. He had shown her a new way of seeing the world, a way that didn't rely on her past or her title. He had treated her like an equal, like a person who mattered. For the first time, she felt like she could stand up for herself, not as a princess, but as someone who had a right to exist, to make her own choices. One night, as they sat around a small fire outside her cabin, Marcus turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said, "I think you're stronger than you give yourself credit for. You've been through so much and you've still managed to keep going. I admire that." The princess smiled, a soft, genuine smile that felt foreign on her lips, but comforting at the same time. "I never thought about it that way," she said, her voice quieter now. "But I think you're right. I've spent so long looking at what I lost that I forgot to look at what I still have." And in that moment she realized something. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was someone who had the power to shape her own destiny. And with Marcus by her side, she knew she could face whatever came next. The days that followed were filled with a sense of purpose the princess had not known in a long time. Each day she worked alongside Marcus, studying the strange data the sensor had revealed. The patterns it uncovered in her biology were unlike anything the scientists of her empire had ever seen. There were hidden aspects of her body that had been overlooked, parts of her that could explain the mystery of her so-called infertility. For the first time, the princess felt a spark of hope flicker inside her. She wasn't just some forgotten failure. There was something in her, something that had been waiting to be unlocked. With Marcus's help, she began to understand the true nature of her own body, her true power. One evening, as they worked under the soft glow of the stars, Marcus spoke up. "There's something strange about the readings," he said, his brow furrowed in concentration as he studied the sensor's results. "It's like your body is holding on to something powerful. It's almost as if you're resistant to what they thought about you." The princess sat up straighter, her heart racing. "What do you mean? What is this power?" Marcus looked at her with a mix of curiosity and excitement. I'm not entirely sure yet, but these readings are unlike anything I've encountered. It's like your biology is designed to protect you, to give you strength. The kind of strength that no one, not even your scientist, could have predicted. The princess's mind raced. Was it possible? Could her people have been wrong all along? Could there be something about her that they simply couldn't understand? The idea filled her with a mix of excitement and fear. If she was truly different, if she was more than just the infertile princess they had cast aside, then everything would change. She looked up at Marcus, her eyes filled with determination. How do we find out what this power is? Marcus didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood up and motioned for her to follow him. They walked out into the open, where the land stretched out before them in a vast, empty expanse. The night air was cool, and the stars above shone brightly. The silence of the planet was peaceful, but there was an energy in the air that felt different, almost electric. We need to try something, Marcus said, his voice filled with quiet confidence. We need to see if we can awaken whatever's inside you. It might be dormant, but if we can tap into it, we might be able to understand it better. The princess nodded, her heart racing with anticipation. She had spent so much of her life being told that she was nothing, that she had no future. But now, in this moment, with Marcus beside her, she felt like she could be something more. She could be the person she had always dreamed of being. Marcus led her to a small clearing where he instructed her to stand still. He handed her the sensor once again and motioned for her to focus on it. Close your eyes, he said gently. Clear your mind. Focus on what you feel inside. On the energy that's been waiting to come out. The princess did as he asked, shutting her eyes and taking a deep breath. She felt the cool air around her, the ground beneath her feet, and the gentle hum of the planet's energy. Slowly, she began to focus inward, tuning into the strange sensations she had felt ever since she started working with Marcus. At first, it was faint. She could barely sense anything at all. But as she concentrated more, she felt something stir deep within her. It was as if a part of her, something hidden, something powerful, was slowly beginning to wake up. It wasn't just physical. It felt like a force of will, an inner strength that had been locked away for so long. Her hands began to tingle, then her arms, and soon, the entire length of her body seemed to hum with energy. It wasn't painful, but it was powerful, like a current running through her veins, making her feel alive in a way she had never experienced before. I can feel it, she whispered, her voice shaking. It's real. Marcus stepped closer, watching her closely. Keep going. You're doing great. The princess felt a rush of warmth, and suddenly, the ground beneath her feet seemed to vibrate. The sensor in her hand pulsed with a soft, glowing light. It was a quiet, subtle energy, but it felt strong, stronger than anything she had ever felt before. For a moment, she thought she might be imagining it, but then she realized that it was real. This was no illusion. There was something inside, her something extraordinary. With a final deep breath, the princess opened her eyes. The world around her seemed sharper, more alive. The air felt heavier, charged with energy. She looked at Marcus, who was watching her with wide eyes. I didn't know it could feel like this, she said, her voice filled with awe. Marcus grinned. I knew it. I told you there was something in you. You've got power, real power. The princess's heart swelled with hope. For so long, she had felt like a failure. She had been cast aside, forgotten, treated like nothing. But now she realized that she was more than what others had made her out to be. She had power inside her, a strength that no one could take away. But the realization also brought a new sense of responsibility. If her power was real, then it wasn't just for her, it was for her people. She could change everything, she could prove them all wrong. But to do that, she needed to go back to her empire. She needed to confront the people who had cast her aside and show them who she truly was. I need to go back, she said, her voice firm. I need to show them what I've become. Marcus nodded. I'll go with you. Whatever you need, I'm here. The princess looked at him, gratitude filling her chest. She wasn't alone anymore, and together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. The morning sun rose over the horizon, casting long shadows across the desolate landscape of the planet. For the princess, it marked a new beginning, a moment that would define the rest of her life. She had felt the stirrings of her hidden power in the quiet of the night, but now, as the dawn light illuminated the path ahead, she was certain that a time had come for her to return to her people. Her body was still buzzing with energy from the previous night's experience. She had never known such strength, such power, and it filled her with a mix of excitement and fear. The doubts that had haunted her for so long, doubts about her worth, her purpose, had begun to fade. She no longer felt like a failure. She had a destiny to fulfill, and she wouldn't let anyone stand in her way. Marcus was already packing his things when she approached him. He looked up at her with a small smile, as if he could sense the change in her. The princess knew that he believed in her, and that belief gave her strength. "You're ready," he said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "I have to be," she replied, her voice steady but filled with determination. "I can't stay here any longer. It's time to face them." Marcus nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I'll help you. I know it's not going to be easy, but we'll get through it together." The princess smiled at him, grateful for his unwavering support. She had no idea what would happen when she returned to the Empire, but she knew that having Marcus by her side made all the difference. He was not just a stranger anymore. He was a friend, someone who saw her for who she truly was, not for the title she had once held, or the mistake others thought she was. Together, they boarded Marcus's ship. The journey back to the Empire was long, and as they traveled through the vast emptiness of space, the princess spent much of her time reflecting. She thought about the grand palace she had once called home, the marble floors, the towering spires, the echoing halls where she had danced as a child. She had always felt that one day she would be a great ruler, loved and respected by her people. But that dream had been shattered the moment the Empire had declared her infertile. As the ship made its way through the stars, the princess couldn't help but wonder how things had changed in her absence. Would they still see her as a failure? Or had the time come for them to realize that she was more than they had ever thought possible? The closer they got to the capital, the more nervous the princess became. She had spent years in exile, far from the Empire and its people. And now, she was returning, not as a disgraced princess, but as someone who had discovered a new strength within herself. The thought of facing her family, her people, was overwhelming. But there was no turning back now. As they neared the capital, Marcus turned to her. "You don't have to do this alone. I'm with you every step of the way." The princess nodded, grateful for his support. "Thank you. I don't know what will happen when we get there, but I can't let fear control me anymore. It's time for them to see who I truly am." The ship touched down just outside the palace grounds. The city was bustling with activity, but everything felt different. The air seemed heavier, charged with the energy of a place that had once been her home. As they walked through the streets toward the palace, the princess noticed the people staring at her. Some faces were familiar, but many were not. It had been so long since she had seen her people, and the years of isolation had made her feel like a stranger in her own world. When they reached the gates of the palace, the guards stepped aside, recognizing her instantly. It was as if nothing had changed, as if she were still the princess they had once known. But she wasn't that person anymore. She had spent too long being defined by her past mistakes. Now, she was determined to define herself. The grand halls of the palace loomed ahead, and as the princess stepped inside, memories flooded back. The echo of her footsteps on the marble floors reminded her of all the times she had walked these halls as a child, full of hope and ambition. But that was a different time, a different her. She was ushered into the throne room where her father sat upon the grand throne. His face was stern, his eyes unreadable. The moment he saw her, his expression shifted, but only for a moment. He quickly masked it as if he were seeing a ghost. "Father," the princess said, her voice calm but filled with emotion. "I've come to speak with you." The emperor looked at her, his gaze cold. "You have no place here," he said, his voice low and firm. "You are a disgrace to our family. You were sent away for a reason." The princess held her ground. She was no longer the same fragile person who had been cast aside. "I was sent away because you couldn't see the truth. You couldn't see that there was more to me than what you thought. But I've learned something in my time away. I've learned that I am not defined by your rejection. I am not defined by what you say I am more than that." The emperor's eyes narrowed. "You are nothing but a failure. You always will be." But the princess didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I am not a failure. I have power inside me. Power that you never understood. Power that could change everything. And I've come to show you that I am not the person you discarded. I am someone who will lead. Someone who will change this empire for the better." The room fell silent. The princess could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air, and for the first time in years she felt something she had long forgotten. The power of her own voice. The grand throne room felt colder than the princess had remembered. The marble walls seemed to press in on her, the high ceilings echoing her every breath. As she stood before her father, the emperor, her heart raced. She had come to face him, to prove that she was not the failure they had all believed her to be. But now that she was here, standing in front of the man who had once been the center of her world, she felt a mixture of fear and determination. The emperor stared at her with a coldness that made her blood run cold. His expression was unreadable, and his eyes betrayed nothing of the thoughts behind them. The years of exile had changed her, but they had also hardened him. The man she had once admired now seemed distant and unrecognizable. "You've returned," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. "Why? Do you think that your return changes anything? You are still the same. A disgrace." The princess stood tall, not letting his harsh words shake her. She had spent too long being defined by his rejection, too long letting his coldness determine her worth. Now she was ready to stand on her own no matter what he said. "I am not the same," she said firmly. Her voice echoed through the room, carrying a strength she had never known before. "I have learned things about myself, things you never knew. I have power inside me, power that you couldn't see, power that could change the future of this empire." Emperor's eyes narrowed, his lips tightening in disbelief. "Power? You think you have power? The only power you ever had was your ability to produce heirs, and you failed at that." The words stung, but the princess refused to let them break her. She had spent too long hiding from the truth, too long believing the lies that had been told to her. She had power, not in the way her father had expected, but in ways that were far greater than anyone could have imagined. "You were wrong about me," she said, her voice steady and strong. "I have more to offer than just my ability to bear children. I have knowledge, strength, and the will to lead. I am not just a princess who was cast aside. I am a leader who will change this empire." For a moment, the room was silent. The emperor seemed to weigh her words, his eyes studying her as if seeing her for the first time. The princess could feel the weight of his gaze, and for the first time in years she didn't flinch. She stood her ground, knowing that this was her moment to show her people and her father that she was not the person they thought she was. "You are a fool," the emperor said at last, his voice sharp. "You have no place here. The empire has moved on without you. The people have forgotten you, and they will never accept you again." The princess felt a surge of anger rise within her, but she controlled it. This was not the time for anger. This was the time for truth. "I don't need their acceptance," she said, her voice strong. "I'm not here for their approval. I'm here to show them that they've been wrong about me. About us." The emperor's face twisted with a mix of disbelief and contempt. "You think you can change everything? You think you can change the way things have always been? You are nothing but a forgotten princess, and nothing will change that." The princess took a deep breath, feeling the power inside her growing with each passing moment. She was no longer the helpless girl who had been cast aside. She was a woman who had discovered her strength, her purpose, and now she was going to show the Empire what true strength looked like. "I am not forgotten," she said, her voice rising, with conviction. "I have never been forgotten. I've been waiting for the right moment to return. And that moment is now." The Emperor sneered, but the princess could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He didn't want to believe her. He didn't want to accept that she had changed, that she was more than just the princess who had failed. "You were always weak," the Emperor said, his voice shaking with anger. "You were never meant to rule, and you never will." But the princess didn't listen to him anymore. She had heard his words for too long. His rejection no longer mattered. She had found her own voice, her own strength, and she wasn't going to let him or anyone define her any longer. "You are wrong," she said quietly. "I was always meant to rule. I just needed to understand that I am not defined by what others think of me. I am defined by what I can do, and I can change this empire." Her words hung in the air, heavy with truth. The Emperor's expression faltered just for a moment. He had spent so many years believing that he was the one who controlled everything, who controlled her. But now, she was taking control of her own fate. "I am not here to fight you," the princess continued, her voice steady. "I'm here to fight for the future of this empire, a future where power is not determined by fertility or bloodlines, but by strength, wisdom, and the ability to lead." The room was silent. The princess could see the people in the background, the palace courtiers, the guards watching her. They had heard her words, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a shift in the air. Maybe they didn't believe her yet, but they were listening. The Emperor's eyes flashed with anger, but for a moment he said nothing. The silence stretched on, and the princess stood there waiting, knowing that this was the moment that would define her. "I am not your failure," she said one last time. "I am the future of this empire, and I will prove it." For the first time, in a long time, the princess felt something she had never felt before, a sense of power, a sense of control. She wasn't a victim of her past. She wasn't the princess who had been cast aside. She was a leader, ready to take her place in the world. And as the silence stretched on, she knew that this was only the beginning. The silence in the throne room was thick, almost suffocating. The princess stood, her heart pounding in her chest, waiting for her father's response. It had been years since she had been in the presence of the Emperor, but now as she faced him, she felt more certain of herself than ever before. She was not the broken, discarded princess they had cast aside. She was someone who had found her strength, her purpose, and now she was ready to claim it. The Emperor's gaze was cold, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. The words she had spoken hung in the air, and for the first time, the princess saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He was used to being in control, to being the one who held the power. But now, it seemed like that power was slipping through his fingers. "You think you can change everything," the Emperor finally said, his voice low, almost trembling with anger. "You think that after all these years you can just walk back in here and take what was never yours?" The princess didn't flinch. Her father's words no longer had the power to hurt her. She had spent too long believing in the lies they had told her, too long feeling like a failure. But now, she knew the truth. She was not the mistake they had labeled her as. She was strong, she was capable, and she was going to prove it. "I'm not trying to take anything," she said calmly, her voice steady. "I'm here to offer something better than the Empire has ever known." The Emperor scoffed, his face twisted with disbelief. "Better? What could you possibly offer? That hasn't already been tried? You've spent years hiding away, doing nothing, and now you think you can change the entire empire?" The princess took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. The anger inside her was growing, but she didn't let it control her. This was her moment. She had waited too long for this. She would not let her father's words undo everything she had worked for. "You've always believed that power is about bloodlines," she said, her voice rising slightly. That it's about who you are born to, who you are related to. But that's not true power. True power comes from within. It comes from strength, from wisdom, from the ability to lead, to inspire. And that's what I have to offer. Her father stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. It was as if he were trying to decide whether to believe her or dismiss her. The princess held his gaze, refusing to look away. She wasn't going to back down. She wasn't going to let him or anyone else define her anymore. You talk about strength, the emperor said, his voice bitter. But what have you done to prove it? You've been exiled. You've been forgotten. And now you think you can just return and lead? The princess's expression softened, but her determination remained unchanged. I've learned more in these years than I ever could have learned in the palace. I've learned about my own strength. I've learned about the people who are struggling, who are suffering under the rule of an empire that values power over people. I've learned what it means to be a leader, not someone who commands with fear, but someone who earns respect through action. For a moment there was silence again. The emperor's expression flickered as though her words were starting to penetrate his hardened exterior. The princess knew that she had made an impact. She had spoken the truth, and no matter how much he resisted, he could not ignore it. I won't beg you for your approval, the princess continued, her voice calm but firm. I don't need your permission to lead. The people will follow me not because of my bloodline, but because they see that I understand their struggles. They see that I am one of them, and I will fight for them. I will lead them to a better future. Her father's eyes narrowed again, but this time there was something else in his gaze, something that wasn't anger or disdain. It was a flicker of something else, something she couldn't quite name. Maybe it was respect, maybe it was fear, or maybe it was both. You're wrong if you think this will be easy, the emperor said, his voice low. You think you can just walk in here and change everything? It will take more than words to convince the empire. It will take more than speeches and promises. The princess stepped forward, her heart steady and her mind focused. I'm not asking for an easy road, I'm asking for a chance to prove that I can lead this empire into a new era. One where the people matter more than titles. One where strength comes from within, not from bloodlines. The emperor looked at her for a long time, as though weighing her words. The tension in the room was thick, and the princess could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was it, the moment where everything would change. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the emperor spoke again, his voice quieter than before. I never thought you had it in you, he said, his tone almost reluctant. But perhaps I was wrong. The princess's heart skipped a beat. Had he just acknowledged her? Had he just admitted that she might have the power to change things? But don't think for a moment that I will simply step aside, the emperor continued, his tone hardening. You will have to fight for your place. The empire won't accept you easily, and neither will I. The princess nodded, a small but determined smile crossing her lips. I didn't expect it to be easy, but I'm ready. And with that, she turned and walked out of the throne room, leaving her father behind. The journey ahead would not be simple. There would be battles to fight, obstacles to overcome. But for the first time in her life, the princess felt like she was truly free. She was no longer the discarded princess, the failure. She was a leader, and her journey had just begun. As she walked through the halls of the palace, she felt the eyes of the courtiers on her. Some of them watched her with disbelief, others with curiosity. But none of them knew what she had become. None of them knew the strength that had been awakened inside her. The princess was ready to take on the future no matter what it held. She was no longer afraid.